Some of you have seen what I'm about to talk about already. Last spring, we reported on the study I'm going to talk about next, but at that point, we didn't have any results. So I want to briefly overview what we did and bring you up to date on what the results were, and then more time spent on having learned from that. You're not hearing me? Oh, I'm good. Thank you. That's good to hear. What we learned from that and what we're doing differently this time, because we're continuing this, and then finally we'll end up with how you can do it yourself. So this is the study as of last spring, and those are all the people that were involved, and our data analyst from last spring is here. Where's Kim? There she is. And the research questions, can we look into the data that Blackboard already collects and make accurate predictions of course success, as Rich was doing? Can we have interventions? Can we make interventions while the course is going on that will change student behavior and lead them to be more successful? And does that relationship change depending on where the students are coming from, what they come to the table with, all the student demographic stuff? Those are the overarching research questions that we dealt with. There. So, briefly, we took two courses. One was the same as Rich's, that are large, that are hybrid, that make extensive use of Blackboard. So we had all kinds of data to play with. Psych 101 and Stat 119. Those are the numbers. A total of 882 people participating in the study. The demographics will be familiar to anybody teaching lower division classes here. 37% underrepresented minorities, the whole range of ethnicities and so on over there. Sex, they had sex. Age, they were 18-ish mostly. And the two big things here, 38% Pell eligible, a phrase that I find myself saying so often lately. I think we should just say Pelligible, like Brangelina. And first generation college, 20% of them as well. So that's what we know about the kids that were in this class. We did an experimental design in that within each section of those classes, half were experimental, half were control. And so within the same room, some things were happening to some and some not to others. And the something was that we were watching what they were doing in the class. We identified triggers, and based on those triggers, they got an intervention of some kind. Now, an intervention isn't all your friends surrounding somebody and telling them to stop doing what they're doing, but it was weaker than that. So this is Mark Lemekis' class. That's Mark Lemekis. And this is fairly typical. We wanted to, in thinking about what the trigger should be and what the intervention should be, we wanted to pick things that any normal faculty member could do without heroic efforts. Data that they could find from Blackboard without having to have a computer science degree, and interventions that could be done fairly easily without needing lots of extra help. So we started with that. We asked the participating faculty, from their own history, what triggers had they found useful in the past, and what kinds of messages did they send to students based on those triggers that might have been helpful. We started with that, and so they were really co-authors. Helen Noble and Mark Lemekis were co-authors, really, of the study in that they helped design the treatment as we went. And this is a pilot, and this semester it's still, I think, pilot-ish, because we're changing things as we go. It's not a rat study where everything stays the same. So the triggers, I presented this last week at a group that was pretty diverse, and I discovered that anybody under a certain age has no idea what this slide means. Yeah, so anyway, the triggers that we chose were, again, easy to do. Clicker points, because these had lectures and the kids had clickers, and clickers were used to show that they were alive, or at least their clicker was alive in the room. That was one of our triggers. If they didn't come to the live class, that means they were missing a big chunk of the course. Low test grade, easy to see. The learning curve quizzes, the quizzes that are part of the publisher's packages that they practice on and so on. If they don't do that, they're not going to do well. If they didn't log into Blackboard at all, we noted that, and that was a trigger. And then finally, I'll talk a little bit about this at the end. At the very end, we also tried something different. We identified the students who could pass if they did a lot of stuff at the very last few weeks of the class. And we gave them a different message than we gave others. And verbatim. It's Shakespearean.
So inspiring.
Do you want to read this aloud so it'll sound more authentic?
I could do a Morgan Freeman one.
Yeah. Well, none of us will read it, but you get the picture here. Basically, it expresses some concern. It says it's from the faculty member himself, and you know, it's talking about how the clickers are, you know, just showing up is a good thing to do, and points to his own experience in the past that if you don't show up, if you don't click, then your likelihood of passing is much lower than if you come to the lectures. So that came to students as an email message delivered from within Blackboard based on those who weren't showing up for lectures in a given week. That's the intervention. And the others were all sort of like this. They, again, were not punitive. They were expressing concern on the part of the faculty, and that they gave some backing for why they were giving this advice, and gave them something to do. In this case, come to class, come to the lecture. So how do you think, how effective do you think that was? And your choices are vary somewhat, slightly, and it went in one eye and out the other for the students. How many of you would say A, very effective? How many would say B, somewhat? C, slightly? D, no effect? Well, hold that thought. So we had all this data. In fact, so much data. One of the problems we discovered, one of the lessons learned, is that there's a mass of stuff that you have to keep track of to do this kind of research. We had their pre and post content knowledge, both in statistics and stat. We had a measure of motivation that turned out not to do much of anything in the way of predictions, so we didn't do that the second time. Self-report time logs, we had their grade E stuff. And then after the semester was over, Kim went over and dredged out of the bowels of the secret vault in Zurich where data about students is kept, and brought it over in a well-guarded box so that we could actually look at the relationships between all of those demographic data and the performance in the class. So here are finally our findings. We asked them to self-report their time. This is the entire semester. We didn't have all of this last time we met. And you can see there's a little drop in the amount of time that they spend in the middle of the semester. That's spring break. But note this is Stat 119. This includes the time that they spend in class. So there's like 3 hours that they're supposed to be either watching an online lecture or the real lecture. And subtract 3 from all of these things. You get that in the psych class. At most, they were spending an extra 2 hours outside of class, and most of the time less than that. And same in the stat class, except that it got to be much more compelling to think about this class as the semester came closer to the end. Why do you think this would be? Why do you think stat and psych are different? Any ideas?
Cumulative final.
Cumulative final, brilliant, yes. So really you had to go back, you had to be thinking about it, you had to be going back and learning, rethinking about the whole course as the semester drove to a close in that class. So, but even still, even with those harrowing, doom-like things ahead of you in the last week of the class, still only spending 4 hours extra a week out of class. The learning analytics and the interventions that we did are here. That is 30% in, let's see, which is which? Stat got no interventions. That is, they showed up for class, so there was no clicker points, they didn't get any bad grades along the way, and so on. And 14% in the psych class also had no interventions at all. And then a bunch had 1, all the way down to, there were a few people, 4%, 2%, who had more than 10 messages coming out to them saying, you're not showing up, you got a terrible grade, we don't like the way you dress. All these things, these messages that we sent out to them, there were a few who got a lot of that. But if you look at those correlations, if you look at the total number of triggers they tripped in their final grade, it turns out to be that those triggers are a pretty good predictor of of final grades. And the way my co-PI, John Whitmer, is the statistician here, so don't ask me any more detail about this slide than what I'm showing you. The regression model that he used to come up with this started with the triggers and then later put in demographic data. And the demographic data didn't add anything to the predictive power. So if you just focus on what they're doing this semester in that particular class, those things that we collected turned out to be pretty good predictors of where they're going to end up. So did they make a difference? Well, this is the answer to your question from a few seconds ago. For the overall student population, no. This is the control group and the stat group. These are the people who passed, 79%. And repeatable grade is a pleasant way of saying failed. The control group, in stat, 21% are going to have to take it again. In the experimental group, same thing. There was a difference, but not a statistically significant difference in the stat grades. So then we went down, and this is where the demographic data did have some effect. Went through every possible combination, and one thing came out, but only for the Psych 101 class. The Pell-eligible students, who had the interventions, or in the experimental group, for example, and no interventions, this is a significant difference. And we calculated, based on the number of students who were in the class, that if everybody had had the interventions, if all the Pell-eligible students had had these interventions, then 30 more of them out of that class would have passed. And you know, that's no small thing. It's certainly a big thing for those 30 kids, and it's a sort of socially important finding to have been able to save that many from having to retake the class and get off to their academic career in a much better footing. So this was exciting. It's a little disappointing that stat students didn't have the same effect. So this is one of the things we're still mulling over. Why would this be? It wasn't that the Pell eligibles got more interventions. They got pretty much the same as everybody else. It's that the intervention somehow impacted their behavior more powerfully than it did for other students. So our conclusions, and this is based on the spring stuff, our predictive power in stat was better because there were more tests, there were more things for us to look at, so it generated more triggers than in the psych class. So, and that's a good argument for something James says and ITS people say every time they get a chance, which is that your courses will be better if they're, instead of big, you know, a midterm and a final and that's it, that if you have lots of small, low threshold, low scariness interventions, quizzes, opportunities for students to get feedback. If you have a lot of them that are small, then your course, especially online courses, is going to be better. The types of triggers and interventions vary significantly by course. I mean, we could see different patterns in just those two classes, and we're going to see it again this semester. And that, looking at this, we didn't really get down into the details of week by week which things students were doing, but we resolved to do that this time. And this was just my own speculation. You know, why would Pell eligible students respond better to that kind of intervention? My guess is that many of them, but not, it wasn't a significant relationship, but many of them are first generation. Many of them are sort of a little bit lost maybe in a sea of 500 faces, and that one human voice, that one message from faculty or more than one that said, I'm noticing that you're not performing well, had more of an impact on them than it would be to other kids. So our lessons learned. We need more intensive interventions. You know, the more we thought about it, the more we weren't sure that students actually read email anyway. And that email, just as a bunch of words on the screen, is not particularly, you know, impressive as a way to change your behavior. So we thought about more direct and more multimedia messages. And the idea for that came from what Helen Noble did in the last, just before the final. She, again, identified kids who could pass if they just went full bore and did everything they could to get a higher score. So she made a little video showing exactly where the bodies are buried in her Blackboard site, where you could find all the stuff you need to do well in the final. And we just sent that message, that video message, out to those students. And that seemed to be a better direction to go than just text. We've realized it would be useful more to know in more fine-grained ways exactly how their behavior changes, how much more time they're spending and on what kinds of things as the course goes on. So we resolved to do that this semester. We also learned that if you're going to do this kind of research, you really have to have sort of an organization scheme in place for your data so that, because otherwise it's just a mess trying to figure out what's relating to what. So next steps are really, in many ways, now steps. This is what we're doing this semester. I'll skip all that. We expand the study. We already did. We added one section of Economics 101. And that broadens the kind of things that we're looking at because Econ 101 is not online at all. It's in a big room. They use Blackboard extensively, but it's not hybrid. It's all face-to-face. And in the spring, we are anticipating adding more courses on top of that. And we are very eager to find more people to represent a broader range of disciplines because I have a sense that every course is different in its own way. That the configuration of behaviors and expectations and what people do in the class, each course is a little bit different. We're going to expand the number of triggers and intensify the interventions and get better track of being able to note the same things for the control students as we do for the experimentals. And I'll just skip ahead to this. So we're adding new triggers. Those are the old ones. In addition to that, not just did they not log into Blackboard at all during a week, but did they not get into it enough? And we're sort of thinking now about what is enough, and we've sort of settled on one standard deviation below the mean. So, for example, one of the classes this semester, they hit 9 different things in the course for a week on average, and 14, and the standard deviation was 4 or 5, I think. So anything less than 7 hits would qualify as not taking advantage of the course. And so we're going to look at that. We're also going to look at the spread of effort. Rather than doing it all on Tuesday, because the course meets Wednesday, we're going to be looking at how students spread out their time throughout the week, because the research is obvious that distributed practice is better than mass practice. And so Blackboard can tell us who's doing which kind of thing. That will be the source of one of our new triggers. So I want to show you, one of our new multimedia messages starring Mark Lamakis.
You're receiving this message because you did not attend our last face-to-face class meeting, and it's really important that you come to class.
Last week, most of your classmates came to the lecture as usual. They got to see a well-organized presentation, ask questions, test their understanding as the hour went on. As far as we can tell, though, you weren't there. We think that because your clicker wasn't clicking when it should have been. In describing his own career, Woody Allen once said, 80% of success is just showing up. Now, it could be that you left your clicker back in your room, or that it wasn't working, perhaps because of a solar flare or something. More likely, though, you just weren't there. Data from previous classes tells us that very few students who attend all the lectures have to take the class again, and those who don't attend often are very likely to fail. So for your own success, do what you can to be there the next time.
I'm Mark Lamakis, and I approve this message.
So we thought that would be more effective than just text in an email. And so there's a number of these. We're making 2 more new ones this week that will be going out for different reasons. And that is the plan to sort of intensify the things. So we're going to turn this over now to Sean. Sean Hawes is a graduate student in my program, Learning, Design, and Technology. And he is going to walk you through how you too can do this kind of stuff without having a Sean at your beck and call, without having to spend too much time on it.